Welcome back. So for today, final review, our last lecture. Next Wednesday, you have your final exam, so you do not need to connect to Zoom. The final exam, just like the midterm, you go to Canvas, you need to use the lockdown browser, you connect, finish your exam, hopefully in less than 1 hour. You have 75 minutes, but I am sure that you are going to finish, most of you usually finish in half an hour, 1 hour at the most. But well, you finish your exam, that's it. And next week, I will post an announcement or send you emails regarding your final grades are available for you to review the exam and other things. So you're going to have final grades hopefully by the next week. Good question. No, there is nothing about other than the grades mentioned in the syllabus. So just what we mentioned there. Good. So for the final review, before we start with the topics, just to be sure, final exam next Wednesday and during the lecture time. Your exam is going to open 4:30, it's going to close 5:45. Yeah, very good point also, the quizzes. You should have access to the quizzes, and just to be sure, you should have access to your questions and you should have access to your answers. So you should be able to go to the quizzes, including the midterm, and check questions and your answers. Some people ask me about the correct answers, and my answer is, for the correct answers, please review the lectures, review the slides. I do not want to ask you to memorize things. I do not want to promote memorization. So you have the question, you have your answer. If you answer correctly before, you have the correct answer. But if you do not answer correctly, my recommendation is go and search for the correct answer. That could help you to study, to prepare yourselves, like to review things, what happened, why you didn't answer correctly. Check the slides or check the videos. If you miss any lecture, all the videos are going to be available. So that is the access that you should have. If for any reason you cannot access a quiz, you didn't find the link or whatever happened, please feel free to contact the TAs. They can help you to review what is happening on Canvas. But you should have access to review your answers and the questions from the quizzes and also from the midterm. Now, before the exam, as usual, you're going to use Respondus lockdown browser. So you have a link. It's going to open at the end of the lecture, or probably it's ready there, to test your system. Please, even though you test Respondus lockdown browser before, please do it again today, tomorrow, before the final. Several things happen, guys. There is always something that happen. Windows update, Mac update, you change something in your computer, you have a new mouse or keyboard or whatever, and for some reason, I was able to take my midterm, but now I cannot take my final. Please check your system. It's just one question, sample exam there, and the only goal is for you to check that your computer is still working and you still are able to use the Respondus lockdown browser. So please check that. Also, guidelines for the midterm exam, the same guidelines, the same file that we shared with you before is there. Take a look. During the exam, just like the midterm, the most important things, show your environment. The system is going to ask you to show everything around you and that your desktop is clean, no books. You cannot use your notes. The only thing that you are okay, if you need it, scratch paper. Just be sure that this empty paper, white paper, and show the paper to the camera. You can use that if you need to draw things or whatever. You do not need to submit that paper. You do not need to send me copies of that paper. It's just paper that you can use and later destroy. Scrap paper is okay. No books, no notes, no cellular phones or any other electronic device. The system is going to flag your exam as suspicious. So same rules that we reviewed before. If you already have access to Respondus lockdown browser, just check that it's working. If for any reason you have a new computer and you do not have the software, There is a link on Canvas, the same sample exam, that if you are accessing without using the logged-on browser, it's going to give you the link to download and install the logged-on browser. So I think you have everything that you need to set up your environment. For the review, just to share with you global ideas of the kind of questions that you're going to have and how to prepare. Your last quiz, the quiz 6, is a pretty good idea of what things can be in your exam. If you think about your midterm plus the quiz 6, those two together are going to be the core of your final exam. Your quiz 6, all these questions about patterns, all these questions about source code, class diagrams, all that, plus what you did in the midterm, theoretical questions, some easy questions about UML, classes, requirements, and so on. So those two together, that could be a pretty good idea, an example of your final exam, used like that. Obviously, for the quizzes, quiz 6, open book, you have an hour, but you can use any resource. For the final, it's closed book, you have more time. So that is the balance. Topics. I give you this global idea, but let me go into the details with the topics and some examples of questions. With the topics, obviously, I am going to mention things for the second part of the class. I am going to mention examples and topics after your midterm, the questions, those that I am going to mention for deep review. The full picture, I am going to show that in a couple of slides, but the examples that I'm going to show for the questions are going to be questions of the second part. For the first part, you can go and check the video in lecture 15 or 16. There are questions there for the midterm that can be still useful for practicing for the final. Questions, everything that we review can be in your exam. It's a comprehensive exam, so probably you want to review lectures 2 to 26. This one is the 26. Anything there can be in your exams. All the questions in the quizzes and in the exams is something that we review during a lecture. Things that we review during the lecture. I am talking about things that we review here that could be on the videos. Sometimes you notice the slides. The slides mention some topics, but sometimes during the lecture, I have moved and use an empty space like this one and show you things and talk about things, reference, connections, examples, and so on. So everything in your exams is on the lectures, but not everything is on the slides, because sometimes we use this white board, or did the replacement for that. So if you miss any lecture, my recommendation, check the video. There could be something there that maybe you miss it. So take a look. Topics. Disclaimer, I am going to mention some topics, just like I did for the midterm, not everything. I do not have enough time for everything. The topics, go and review our lectures. But a summary, the most important ones, probably topics that you can review and at least get 70, 80 in the exam. So the most important topics that are going to be there for sure. A full picture, just for you to take an idea of what we did. The midterm was this. This picture I showed you before. We used this picture when we studied for the midterm. So all these things here, we already reviewed it. You already have an idea of the question because you did the midterm. And I am mentioning here the assignments and the topics. So just for you to compare, this was the midterm. A lot of topics, but most of them theoretical. So the questions, multiple choice with a value of 1, 2, 3 points, really the easy part. For the second part, after the midterm, a summary of what we did is something like this. I put here, just like before, the core topics. And you can notice for the second part, after the midterm, we do not cover a lot of topics. In fact, what we did is design patterns, a full exercise with design patterns, architectural patterns, assignments that involve design patterns and architectural patterns one-on-one, and metrics. Metrics for the code and metrics for the diagrams, period. If you take a look to the slides, to the lectures, this is what we did. A few topics. However, these topics are going to be the topics that I can use for open questions. These are the topics in which I can ask you for source code, in which I can ask you for calculate something, the metrics, in which, like in the quiz, you can have source code and the question could be to select which is the class diagram that represents the source code, or the class diagram that represent or include a particular pattern, and so on. These are the topics in which you are going to have a considerable number of open questions, asking for coding, asking for numbers for the metrics, or questions in which you need more time. Questions that ask you about the class diagrams. You are not going to draw the diagram are going to be there. And even though you only need to select which one is the correct one or the one that match with the code, you need more time. You need to review the connections and the elements. Is more time consuming. And because of that, well, the question have most value. It's not going to be used 1 point, 3, 5, 10 in that line. These questions probably most of them multiple choice. Now, let me be clear. I am telling you most of them in these topics multiple choice, most of them in these topics open questions. Not all of them. Just to give you an idea about what is more important. It's a comprehensive exam. Yes. You are going to have open questions and multiple choice questions. Yes. However, the open could be about these topics. Oh, and those are going to have a highest value. Okay, so maybe it's a good idea to put particular attention to review the new topics, these ones, because the questions are going to be higher value. Again, use a good idea. But anything can be there. Now, talking about these particular topics, to review this, again, you can go to the video that we did for the midterm, but let's review these topics and some examples of questions or things that you could be asked to do during the final for these topics. Things that I highly recommend you to review, to remember. Number 1, for the observer, the decorator, and the singleton, those 3 are for before the midterm, so I didn't put more things here, but for those 3 patterns, number 1, remember the class diagram. It's important that just reading the name, you remember the class diagram. How does look the class diagram for the observer? What is the picture for the class diagram of the decorator or the singleton? Together with the class diagram, the source code. What do I need to do in order to make a singleton? Question in your exam. This is a class cat. Can you make the cat a singleton? Or this is a class computer. Can you make this computer a singleton? Or do I have this dog and this student? Can you make the dog observable and the student an observer? Remember those questions in the midterm? Similar to that. Additional those 3, factory and chain of responsibilities. Those are 2 patterns that we add after the midterm. Well, we didn't evaluate them, not in deep in the midterm. So for the final, something that you can expect for sure is questions similar to the one that I mentioned here. You already answered that in the midterm, but now including chain of responsibilities and factory. Can you create a factory for coffees? Can you create a chain of responsibility to do? And there is going to be a description of what. And just like before, do you remember the class diagram for chain of responsibility? Can you identify the class diagram of chain of responsibility? The class diagram for factory? The source code, what you need to do in order to create a factory. The source code, what you need to do in order to create a chain of responsibility. In particular, a tricky question. Can you identify the difference between decorator and chain of responsibility in the class diagram? Hopefully you remember these two class diagrams are very similar. Very, very similar, almost identical. What is the difference? If you have both diagrams, the chain of responsibility and the decorator, what is different between them? How do we know? How can you connect decorator with the correct diagram or chain of responsibility with the correct diagram? If you do not remember that they look similar, go and check your notes, the slides. Take a look to these two, very similar. What makes them different? You did an assignment with this one and you did an assignment with this one. So you have used both. You know the difference. You program the difference. Do not forget that during the exam. Probably here, the most complicated question, the most tricky question maybe. 1, 2, 3 things to review. So far, hopefully not so hard. Next, you can expect to have questions, source code and diagrams that do a combination of these 5. During the midterm, the question was mostly independent. An observer, a singleton, one question there, and maybe some of you have this question with 2 patterns together, but most of you have questions about one or the other, or 2 different questions, 2 different patterns. For the final, something similar to the lecture in which we connect the dots. Something similar to that lecture in which we do a full system, and the system was using observer, chain of responsibilities, factories, and one singleton. If you remember that lecture, moreover, if you did that assignment, for sure, something like that is going to be in your exam. Obviously, I am not going to ask you to do the full programming like in the assignment, but something that you're going to do is I am going to ask you for the source code for a particular method, for a particular class, for particular lines that I need to add or to remove, like for the singleton. Here is the source code. Transform this source code to a singleton. Tell me which lines I need to change, what modifications you will do. Similar with the others. So review the patterns, review the class diagrams, review the source code. Be prepared for doing something similar to your assignment, the connecting the dots assignments. Not as big, but that same idea. If you're familiar and you can do something like that, complete for your exam, if I ask you for one method or 2, it's going to be something easy, something that you can do in 5 minutes. Something that I am going to ask you to do beside the patterns and somehow connected with that. Question in your exam. If I describe to you something like this bullet, students, staff members, request a library to notify for the availability of a book, which pattern can we use for this to happen in a software system? Which pattern I am asking you to implement between which classes? Easy one, right? Observer. Observer between which one and which one? I cannot ask you to draw the diagram, but just imagine that I ask you right now, just for practice, to draw the class diagram that correspond to the question in the first item. Hopefully, you are okay with me that library is observable, agree. Observer, student, staff members, agree. Can we agree on that? That is exactly what I am asking you to do. And there is no special mention there like implement observer. There is no special mention about which are the classes. It's just a description of a problem and you translate that problem to source code. Source code with the classes, I cannot ask you to do the diagram, but what about asking you for the source code? Can you help me with the source code of a class library that is observable? And can you help me with a class student and a class staff, which are observers? And you can use the Java API for the observer and observable. I am not asking for any particular method, so you can put the methods that you need. Do you remember which are the elements in the source code that you need to add to student, for instance, to make that student an observer? There are two things. Do you remember? And it's part of your midterm, but the kind of questions that are going to be there again. Two things to add to a class like student to make that class observer. The update method is one of those, yes, and the other? Something with the inheritance, right? We connect student and observer with this in the Java API with implements. If we're using the Java API, one is going to be an interface, the other is going to be a class, that's fine. If you're using the pattern, both connections are inheritance, both connections are extents. But in this particular case, observer is going to be the interface, is going to be an implement, and you put inside the override of the update method. Just like what you do with the listener, remember? Implement the listener and provide the action perform method. That is the equivalent to the update. Good. So what about the second one? The second one is the second part of the question above. So it's the second part of the problem that we already have solved with this idea of the library and blah, blah, blah. Question regarding this scenario. There is a connection between register and library, yes or no? A connection in a class diagram, a connection in a UML domain. There is a connection in the UML class diagram between a class library and a class register that correspond to the description that I mentioned above. Yes or no? And if yes, which one is the connection? And remember that we have realization, inheritance, composition, association, etc. So what is the connection between register and library? Yes, association, correct. Association, and the arrow is going to point to library or to register? To library? According with the problem is the library check with the register, right? I mean, the problem is the library, I am the library, and I am going to check with the register. I am going to ask to the register about something, whatever. Check. What did I mean with check? What is going to do library with the class register? Can we agree that it's going to be a call, a method? Maybe the method is check. Yeah. That is the reason because I am showing you this question, because I know that you have the answers. Read carefully. That is the message here. The library, the register, According with the problem, the library is going to review, is going to ask the register, and I want to be sure that we agree that this review, check, whatever, is I am going to call a method. I am going to call a method. The class library is going to call a method in the class register, calling a method. If this guy is calling a method in this guy, what is the direction of the arrow? The library point to register or register point to library? Yes. Hopefully everyone agree. The class that is calling the method point to the class that have the method and is going to execute the method. Using, remember? Library is using register. Using because it's asking for information. It's going to ask those guys to review something and tell me. This tell me is the return, right? So I am calling a method and they are going to give me something with this return. But the direction of the arrow is who is calling the method. The direction of the arrow is not the direction of the return information. So this one called the method that is there. Yeah, the return is going to go back, but that is not what we represent with the arrow. Good. So just remember that. Classical examples of this, the Blackboard pattern that we implement also when we did singletons, remember the direction of the arrows is pointing to the singleton because other classes are calling the singleton for something. Other classes are using the the repository. So just remember the direction of the arrows. Tricky question, several ways to represent this. That one is for the library. All the other things, what connection exists between book and library, if any? They are connected, and hopefully you agree with me, yes. What is the connection? Aggregation. Fully agree with that. This is something that we talk. I remember using library and books to exemplify composition and aggregation, and hopefully we remember that. A very good idea with libraries and books was this aggregation, just because we want to think about the library to exist even though the library have 0 books. So we call the library the building. So a library with 0 books, we are okay with that. So we use aggregation. Moreover, makes sense. We aggregate books to the library, right? So a diamond there, the connection. We already have student and employee as an observer. We already have this library observable and so on. So we're creating the class diagram. Again, I cannot ask you for the class diagram. I can show you class diagrams and ask you to select a good one, or I can ask you for the source code. If I ask you for the source code, can you help me with the source code for the class library? In these diagrams, obviously. Number one, can we agree that there is not going to be any inheritance in library? At least if I give you this class diagram, can you agree that anything that you put there, like class library extends students, or class library implements employee, or something crazy like that, is wrong? No inheritance, no realization. It should be used like this. Second, this is one thing that the graders are going to review, because this is an open question, so someone is going to be grading. So the first thing that someone is going to review is class library, period. Nothing extend, nothing implement, there is no connection like that here. Second, what about the diamond? What do you do to represent this diamond with book? And yeah, an attribute. An attribute, and the type of the attribute should be book. And well, you have a variable. I didn't put here multiplicity. So use B could be fine. If I go to the details and I add the library have 55 books, well, you can play with arrays. Or if I put an asterisk, you can play with a data structure. Those things are going to change. Maybe one of you is going to have the asterisk, another of you is going to have a number. So you decide what to do with that particular line. Second thing that the grader is going to review is well, that line. The line should be there. There should be a line with the data type book and something else. If there is a one, it's only one variable. If there is a number, it's an array. If there is an asterisk, it should be a data structure that is dynamic. Something like that. Other than that, well, you are calling a method in register, so you should have at least one method. I mean, we agree that we cannot call methods used inside of the class. We need a method to call the method. If you do not have any particular requirement about the name of the method, we don't care about the name. The only thing that we're going to check is, okay, you remember that the call to a method should be inside of a method, you have your method, and here inside, you're going to call something in register. If you have specifications about which method to call, we're going to check that that specific method is called there. If not, use anything. Anything here, calling a method there. Anything could be, you are going to use the name of the class with the name of a static method, so register dot something, or you're going to create an object register local because there is no indication here about a global, and then you're going to use that object to call a method. Any option. Again, if you do not have a specific requirement, it's up to you. If there is a specific requirement, then follow the instruction, because that is what we're going to be grading. So these kind of questions, open questions for source code or for identifying a good diagram, similar to the one that you have in the quiz, similar to what you're answering right now in the chat. And as you can notice, it depends on how fast you can write, but for these kind of questions, 1 minute, 5 minutes, if you need to write the source code, 3, 10 lines, depending on your coding, should not be so hard. Another one, can you create a class diagram? Here I am going to ask to create the diagram. Again, in your exam is select the correct answer, and you have a bunch of class diagrams and you need to review them and select which one is the one that corresponds to the source code. So for your question, and here for reviewing, can you create a class diagram that corresponds to this source code, crazy source code? I put in red the name of the classes. So if you can just read the name of the classes right now and create a picture in your mind, or maybe in a piece of paper there, and you say, well, these are my classes and these should be the connections. That is something that you could need for the exam. Quickly here, I'm doing exactly the thing that I asked you to do. If I have a class, M, extend, human, I have this one. What is the connection between this one, SW, and M? Because I need to complete that part of the diagram, right? So I already have M, inheriting, human. I have this one, and this one is inside of here. What is the connection? There is a diamond there, maybe? Composition, aggregation, or maybe use association. In any case, I have an arrow, and the arrow is going to be pointing to some point. It's going to go from this to this or this to that. What is the connection? It's a variable that is inside of a method. It's a local one, looks like that. Whatever it is, aggregation, or association. With diamonds or without diamonds? That is exactly the question here. Diamond or no? Aggregation or association? And how do we know? What do we need to review? Okay. One issue that we have here, and again, the reason because I am showing you this, we have two classes to review. We need to check this one and this one because they are connected. They have inheritance, right? So whatever variable attributes do I have in the parent class, they are also in the child. So something that I am sure catch your attention is, well, yes, you are using this class here, but that class is not the one that is creating the variable. That class is the one that goes for the new. Really, the ones that I care are the variables here, the variable, the type before the W, right? Because remember, we're looking for attributes, global variables, or we're looking for local variables. So we're looking for the data type before the name of the variable. Here, yeah, I have the class, but the question is, well, where is the variable? I mean, what is W? And what? W is here. Ouch. W belongs to the class human. So W belongs to the class human, and W is this. But it's inside of human. So there is a connection between human and watch. What is the connection between human and watch? With a diamond, right? Hopefully you can agree with me. Human has a watch. And that watch is the same that I am inheriting in M. And then M is doing something with this star watch. By the way, that one, dot. I am connecting all the classes, but still I am waiting for the connection between these two. What is happening between those two? This line here is an aggregation. I have something or I am using something. That is the name of a method that I am calling, or is the name of a data type that I am using to create a variable. And hopefully you agree with me here. You are not creating a variable. There is a method calling. for the new. If you are not creating a variable, you do not have a diamond. Therefore, it's not composition, not between these two. It's not aggregation, not between those two. Between those two, what it is? Yes, association. Association, and the direction of the arrow is pointing down or pointing up. Millennial pointing to watch. This one is the one calling the method, right? A method there. The one that had something, the diamond, the parent, the child, is using connections. So be careful. You can read the name of the classes, like the one that I put in red. Be careful that the name of a class can be used as the data type for the variable or can be used as a method. The constructor is a method. Yeah. And that is a very good way to review this. It's like, well, I am checking this class and this class do not have any variable here. You can notice this method is used methods, variables, calling things. So there are no variables global. So you can assume, you can 99% of the time, no variables, no diamonds. The diamonds need variables. You have variables like this one, diamonds. Things that you can review quickly, and therefore in less than 5 minutes, and with a question. If I give you this source code and you go and check M and you notice diamonds in M, that obviously I'm going to put that cases, you can think like, no, none of the options with diamonds in M is going to match the source code that is here. You can apply the same with inheritance or with other relationships. Usually, if you select a good class and you check the relationship of that class, you can just check in the class diagrams and you're going to notice differences. And with one class or a couple of classes, you can identify, okay, this is the one that match to be the best solution. You can mark that one. And if you have time, you can go back there later and review all the classes. But for sure, with a couple of classes, you can identify a good solution or the correct solution. Well, the watch exists here. But remember, there are two things here. One thing is to exist with the null value. And the other thing, a different thing, is to exist and have as an initial value null. Something that happened here, and you can notice, is I have here the variable. Yeah, this guy is going to inherit the variable. What is the value for the variable? Always is different than null? Always that variable have a connection with an object? No. No, because number one, I am missing some constructors. In particular, I am missing the constructor, the default constructor that always do a new to that variable. Usually when you have this, the variable at the top without the equal to something, you go and search for the constructors. And unless you have a default constructor that always run, you do not have 100% sure that that variable is going to have value. And if you do not have 100% for sure that the variable is going to have a value, is aggregation. So the white diamond, not composition. So that is the only thing. Small details, things that you need to check, because yeah, we're going to play with black diamond, white diamond in the exam. So good, a good example. Moving forward, class diagram for this one. Which of the following diagrams correspond to this source code? And as you can notice, I have 4 classes, interfaces, whatever. I have 4 things. And the question is so simple. The question is, which are the connections between those classes? And you have that question in the midterm or in the quiz, like, tell me, what are the connections here? First, implement zero. So first implement zero. Hopefully you can agree with me, implements, realization, and therefore, I didn't ask you, but that is the direction of the arrow, right? The triangle is pointing to zero, not the opposite. Then I have a variable inside of first, and the data type is second, and the name of the variable is x. Hopefully that is a diamond. A diamond, and the diamond should be in first because it's the owner, and the line go to second because it's the data type for the variable. First has second. So far, I have no idea if it's going to be black or white, so I just draw white. If I need to make it black, I can add color, but it's going to be black or it's going to be white. And hopefully you notice like, well, it's going to remain white. Why? No new here, no constructor. Obviously the class have a constructor, the default constructor, but the default constructor is empty by default. So no one is going to put a value in the variable, so the variable can be null. White diamond, aggregation. Good. And finally, third, is this class connected with first? Yes or no? There is another connection? Yes, yes. So 4 classes and basically 3 different relationships. Here I draw the class diagram for your exam, something like what you did on the chat. Is this class to this class, this relationship, this class to this class, this relationship, this class to this class, these relationships, and any other mention that I do there. If I tell you that 0 is an aggregation of second, or second is inheriting from 0, whatever crazy things I put there, those options are not correct. You do not select them. These are the 3 that you select, or those are the 3 that you draw or write, whatever. So source code, class diagram. I am showing you this, but obviously think about the opposite. This is the class diagram. Give me the source code. Important thing to do, important thing to review. The other important thing, moving with patterns, you remember this. This is a picture that I show you when we work with this connecting the dots assignment. And probably the most important thing that I would like to ask you to review in this assignment and be ready to answer questions about it, that part, chain of responsibilities. You already played with decorator before, so I am not concerned about decorator. There are going to be questions about decorator, but here for the review, I want to point into the chain of responsibilities just because that is the newest one. That is the one that we play only after the midterm. So review this pattern for sure. All of you are going to have at least one question with this one because it's the new guy. It's the new thing that we review after the midterm. So class diagram for chain of responsibilities. If I ask you to draw the class diagram, or if I show you the class diagram, do you remember how the class diagram for the chain of responsibilities looks like? Something like that, yes or no? And yes. If someone told me looks like the decorator, that one, right? The diamond here and the inheritance here. If you have something like this, that could be decorator or chain of responsibilities. how do you know which one? How do you identify one from the other? What is the difference between decorator and chain of responsibility in the diagram, but most important, in the source code? What things happen or do not happen in one and happen or do not happen in the other one? There is something that you can check in the source code to identify one from the other. What? Do you remember that in both you have a method in the parent, and that method, obviously you override in the child. So for instance, if I have this class diagram and the name of the method is M, we play with operator and we play with draw and other names. In this example, if the name is M, use method, any method. In a chain of responsibilities, this guy have the method, this guy have the method, this guy have the method. So I have those three, the three of them have the method. If we think about decorator, usually we draw decorator like the original one, some decoration, and another decoration. You can remember the examples that we did with the guys and the masks, or the ball and the boxes, whatever. So decoration and the chain. Method, 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 method. It's the same picture. Well, that is tricky because this class can have childs or this one can have childs. That is not the most important difference. Yes, that is the difference between the pictures in the Gang of Four book. They put childs to one class, not to the other, but both can have childs. The big difference is regarding the execution of the method itself. Do you remember that when we did decorator, this method was draw? And what we do is to call the method, this method M here, draw. And this one called this one, and this one called this one. So you call one, and that one called the others. Do you remember that that was the key of the decorator? You call the paint or the draw or whatever was the name to one, the decoration outside, and then that one trigger calling all the others. So at the end, what you have on the screen is the result of all the three in this example, or whatever is the number before. All of them work. All of them draw something. All of them print something on the screen. You have the example from the slides. So when you're talking about decoration and you're talking about these methods, in a decoration, all the methods work. All the methods do some work. Paint something, draw something, print something, calculate something, all of them. What about the chain of responsibilities? All of them work or not? Do you remember what do we have inside of the method? Inside of the method M, or whatever is the name, operation, when we have a chain of responsibilities? Do you remember the body of this method in the chain of responsibility pattern? What do we have always? Mandatory. Something that we do not have in the decorator. That is the name of the method, handle request. That is the equivalent of my M. What do we have inside of handle request? Do you remember that? Yes. To check whether or not to handle the request. And that is an if-else condition. Something that you have in the chain of responsibility that you do not have in the decorator is checking if this is for me or not. Because in the chain of responsibility, only one of these guys, only one is going to work. All of them maybe are going to check the if, remember our example, if the box have this measure or this measure or a different thing, they are going to check an if. If the if is true, one of them is going to work and go back, report a result. If the condition is false, it's going to call to the next one. We only call the next one when the condition is false. In the decoration, we always call the next one. The decoration is we all are going to work. I am going to do something, you are going to do something, he is going to do something, she is going to do something. All of us are going to work. All of us are going to provide a decoration. With the chain of responsibility, only one of us is going to work. Only one. Which one? Depending on the condition. Condition true, you work. Condition false, pass the request to another. Other than that, the two patterns, the two class diagrams are practically the same. Yep, that is the point. If you have this if condition in the method M, handle request or whatever, probably you have a chain of responsibility, not a decorator. And the successor, adding a successor is like adding a decoration. You remember that we reviewed this? This is the successor of this, or this one is connected with this, and this one is the successor. These connections are the same that we have with this decoration and the original object. We connect them. We add a name, successor, or decoration, according with what we are doing. But the important thing is everyone works, or only one work. Only one work, this is a chain of responsibility. We all work, this is a decoration process. Review the source code, review the examples, and be sure that you have clear those ideas that you describe in the chat, those ideas that we are describing here. Decorator, bit versus chain of responsibility. Very important topic. There are going to be at least one question for that. Architectural patterns. Hopefully you remember model view controller. Question in your exam for sure. What is a model? What is a view? What is a controller? Hopefully you remember controllers, your listeners, views, your graphical user interfaces, model, your functionalities. Whatever you are doing. If we have a factory, if we have a chain of responsibilities, if we're doing decoration, usually those things happen as part of the functionality. The listeners, the controllers, you can remember listeners, observers, and your graphical user interface, your views, well, sometimes those are decorations. If you remember panels and widgets, they decorate. This one, probably the most important, model view controller, and the other one, equally important, Blackboard. Review the source code and review the logic of model view controller and Blackboard. For sure, all of you are going to have at least one question involving those. The other, client server. There are questions about client server in your exam. However, there are not enough questions to put this one in all the exams. So something that I think is going to happen is client server. Some of you are going to have questions about client servers, probably not all the exams. However, these two, I am pretty sure that there are going to be questions about model view controller and Blackboard in all your exams. So very, very important, very, very important. Important, but a little bit less than the others. questions that could be theoretical, besides the things that we already reviewed in the midterm. Question for 1 or 3 points. What is an architecture? What is the difference between the architecture and the design? We reviewed this in one of the lectures. Which of the followings are architectural patterns? You have that question in your quiz. Which of the followings are design patterns? You have also that question before. Model view controller, the source code, we did an implementation. Model view controller, this class diagram that we review. Remember, the architectural patterns do not have a standard class diagram. However, something that we did is somehow implement one version, one example, similar thing that we did with the Blackboard, similar thing that we did with the client server. So these, I need to be sure they are not a standard, but we create examples for that from them. We did this moving from the architecture to a design to an implementation. We reviewed this example using threads for the Blackboard, sockets for the client server. So I need to ask you, be sure to review that source code, those slides, these topics for your final exam. It is not the most important part, but again, 1 or 2 questions involving this, 3 points, 5 points. So you can survive without answering or without knowing these topics, but well, something between 5 to 10 points in total could be valuable to review this. You have the source code in the slides. The only thing that you need to do is to understand the source code and be sure that you understand how to translate that source code to a class diagram or from the class diagram that we review to the source code. Review threads, Runnable, the thread class, the Runnable interface, and sockets, socket and server socket. Be sure to run the code that I shared with you and to understand how that works. Moreover, the class diagram that represents the code that you have in the slides. We'll talk about it. You have the lecture, but be sure to review. Questions for multiple choice for sure. This, your assignment. Hopefully you remember this part. Review your assignment, the last one. And if for any reason you receive help with any of the small parts, if someone help you with something, just be sure before the exam to review everything and be sure that you understand everything, just like if that thing is all yours, that you can answer any question connected with this assignment, because this assignment could be the core for a lot of questions related with the patterns, but also related with source code and the connection of that source code with the design pattern. So this assignment involves several different things that could be in your exam. Please, if you receive help to do the assignment before the exam, be sure to review and understand everything that you submit. Good. So closing, almost the last thing that we review was the metrics, something that is going to happen. You have this diagram in the previous lectures. You can review the details there, but something that you're going to have for sure, this source code and the questions, literally lines of code in this code, which is the number here. Lines of code, and it's a box, and you need to write the number. Effective lines of code, there is a box, and you need to write the number. Logic lines of code, there is a box, you need to write the number. Cyclomatic complexity, there is a box, you need to write the number. Quickly, as an exercise, can you help me with the numbers? Yeah, for sure. Hopefully that one is easy, and that is like easy points for everyone. The others? Cyclomatic complexity. I am going to copy the answer from the chat. 10 question mark. In cyclomatic complexity is easy one. Three or four? Okay, four. Tricky question, remember, cyclomatic complexity, the number of connection, the number of conditions plus one. So it's a classical error. For some reason, several students is like, okay, three conditions, three. Do not forget the plus one. So four, yes, good. So cyclomatic complexity, 4 lines of code, 17 effective lines of code. What do we count as effective lines of code? Everything except white spaces, comments, right? Effective lines of code, everything but not comments, not white lines. Moreover, all those open curly bracket alone, no. So how many lines do we have? Okay, so good. What about the logic lines of code used to close the exercise? Okay, 7 or 8? Okay, have 2 votes for 7. 7. You can check it. 7. Right, remember the semicolons, how many semicolons, and the for loops count like only 1, not 2. So the for loops, 2 plus the other semicolons, and you have the 7. Okay. Good. Okay. The last one, instability, distance, and abstraction per classes. So for instance, this one here is an interface. Abstractness for that one, neural network. Abstractness is going to be 1 or 0 or 0.5 or what? It's an interface, therefore 1. Hopefully you agree with me, right? What about instability for that one? Yeah, the A is going to be 1 if you have interfaces, or if you have an abstract class, it's going to be 0 for a normal class. And for the packages, you need to count how many you have abstract versus how many you have that are not abstract. For the instability, this is the equation, right? We did example before, but if I ask you for the instability of that one, the neural network there, check that one. What is the value for instability of this guy? Number of outputs. So how many outputs here? 0, right? The diamond is like an input, and the inheritance is like an input. So 0 outputs. Therefore, it's going to be 0 divided by whatever. 0 divided by 2. 0. Very common error, and I know it's tricky. It's like, it was 0 divided by 2, so it's 0. Common errors, and I appreciate the chat, is like, you know, we can make mistakes. We can think that the diamond is output. We can think that the diamond is an arrow that goes in that direction, but it's not. The diamond is the beginning of the line, so it's pointing to the opposite direction. Practice. I know about those errors, those common mistakes, those tricky parts. Be sure to review that, be sure to practice, and well, this one, easy, abstraction 1, instability 0. What about distance? The equation, just to remember the equation, okay, abstraction 1 plus 0, minus 1. Common error, guys. Several people forget this minus 1, so very, very common. It's abstraction plus instability, 1 plus 0, 1. Minus 1. Do not forget the minus 1 in the distance. Do not forget the plus 1 in the cyclomatic complexity when you count the conditions. Those are kind of the common errors. And that's it. This is your exam. Any question, guys? Okay, so I stop here. Any question, send us an email, and good luck with your exam Wednesday. Thank you.